Recording in progress.
Oh, I need my. Got it. Thank
You're
you.
all set, buddy.
All right, if you recall, last time I did Education Sunday, we talked about leadership in churches, and I had 4 churches I was going to talk about and barely got through 2. And I asked the question at that time, should I come back with the other ones? And everybody, either out of politeness or out of genuine interest, said yes. So we're back with Roman Catholicism and Orthodoxy, but we're not going to get to Orthodoxy, I don't think. There's a lot to talk about with the Roman Catholics right now. And so I think we're going to just be on that. So you asked for it. Here it is. And let's take a look at that. What I want to do is talk a little bit about the structure, basically the priesthood structure of the Roman Catholic Church. And of course, we're going to talk a lot about choosing a pope, because that is the big news right now in the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, so let's get started on that. Roman Catholic leadership. I don't know how familiar you are with some of this. You may know this stuff really well. I don't know that. But there are 3 levels of clergy. You have the bishops at the top, you have the priests in the middle, and you have the deacons down below. Okay, and that's the level of priesthood, of clergy, I should say. And that's been the structure for a very long time. I mean, the 100s AD, they were doing this. So when we talk about James, the brother of Jesus, he was the bishop of the church at Jerusalem. He was the head of the church at Jerusalem. And that's something we know from Acts, So that structure was already in place there. So what these 3 levels can do, all 3 can do all of these. They can preach, teach, baptize, witness marriages, conduct funerals. Okay, so all 3 of those can do all of those. Now the priests and the bishops have more responsibilities. They can do the sacraments. Okay, and you note the Roman Catholics don't consider marriage a sacrament. That doesn't mean they don't honor it, because they do honor it. They honor it probably as much as anybody I've ever heard of, because you can't get divorced, not and still remain a Catholic. So they honor marriage, but they don't consider it a sacrament. These are the main sacraments here: the Eucharist, penance, confirmation, anointing the sick. And priests and bishops can all do both of those, all of those. And Matt.
So they also don't consider baptism a sacrament.
Well, I am at the very limit of my knowledge on this, so I don't want to say something wrong. All I know is that these are considered the main sacraments that the priests and the bishops can do. So I'll leave it at that. And if somebody knows better, now's your time to shine and let me know, because I'm not sure. So then bishops, which are the top of the hierarchy, can administer the sacrament of holy orders. That's ordaining. And that's really a big deal in the Roman Catholic Church. It is a big deal in all churches, including ours. But it's a big deal in the Roman Catholic Church. So only bishops can ordain. So bishops, and there's basically 1 bishop for over 100 parishes here in southwest Wisconsin. And that bishop has to do all the ordaining of all the priests and all the deacons. And so that's a major part of their ministry. So let's look at bishops. Priests and deacons are considered the helpers of the bishop. So the bishops have the most of the authority. They are the ones who make the rules or administer the hierarchy of the priesthood. They're considered to possess the fullness of the orders, which means they have all of the authority. So others have some limited authority. The College of Bishops are considered the successors of the apostles. So the apostles on earth, the successors to the apostles of the old, are the bishops of today. That's how they look at that. Yeah, we're going to get to the Archbishop. The question was, what about archbishops? And we're going to get to that in a minute, but archbishops are a specialized kind of bishop who administers a larger administration area. So bishops provide the pastoral governance for a diocese. A diocese is their unit which contains a lot of individual churches, not just one, but a lot. Okay, and we'll look at the Wisconsin structure in a minute so you can see how that plays out. They might have all that stuff. So, and their authority is both religious and administrative. So they are in charge of administration, also in charge of religion and theology and things like that. Just to note that Pope is not a formal priesthood title. Okay, it's just something they call the Bishop of Rome. But the Pope's official title is Bishop of Rome. Okay, just so you know that. So all bishops are considered to be equal in level. And the Pope has the greatest authority, no doubt about that. Nobody's denying that. But because his diocese is essentially the entire church, worldwide church. But at least Pope Francis always referred to all the other bishops as venerable brother. So he thought of them as brothers in the faith at an equal level with him, although everybody knew that he was actually had more authority. Okay. Bishops are appointed by the Pope, and only the Pope. So the Pope has control over the bishops of the entire church. And they're usually ordained by 3 other bishops to their, yes. Chris.
Are you going to talk about cardinals?
Yes, I am.
Perfect. Thank you.
In fact, it's my favorite baseball team, so I'm going to spend a lot of time. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. We're not. Uh-oh, you said that kind of sadly. I'm sorry, Jerry. There's all these numbers, and you can read the numbers if you want. There are thousands of dioceses in the Catholic Church, and there are bishops who don't have dioceses because there's more bishops than there are dioceses. In Wisconsin, we have 5 dioceses, and you can see the map here. Green Bay, Superior, La Crosse, Madison, and then there's an archdiocese of Milwaukee. And that's actually a diocese, but it's called an archdiocese because there's an archbishop that is there. And we'll get to that. Worldwide, though, look at all these dioceses, and archdioceses, the United States has almost 200 and dioceses and 32 archdioceses. So there's a lot of this. An archdiocese is headed by an archbishop, has enhanced administrative authority. Basically, what it is, there's another level called an ecclesiastical province, which includes a bunch of dioceses. And so Wisconsin, the actual geographic borders of Wisconsin, is one ecclesiastical province. And so the archbishop, whose name is Jeffrey Grobe, is the archbishop in Milwaukee, and he has administrative authority over all of this. Okay?
So does he kind of wear 2 hats then?
In a sense, yes, because
Okay,
he's
so
also
the
bishop
Milwaukee.
of the Milwaukee area. Exactly.
Okay.
I didn't have that in here, so thank you for mentioning that. He basically does 2 things. So he's a busy fellow. And I thought you might be interested to know how much money these people make. Bishops get $20.25 an hour. And if they worked a 40-hour week, and I don't know any minister who only works a 40-hour week, but assuming they worked a 40-hour week, they would make $42,000 a year. So they're not particularly well paid. They don't do this for the money, So priests make even less than that. So we'll get to that in a minute. Well, no, they do get paid by the hour though, not by the salary. So they do get, um, it's not overtime. They don't get time and a half or anything like that. But if they work 50 hours a week, they get paid 20 hours, $20 an hour for 50 hours a week. This idea of cathedrals is tied to bishops also. Cathedra is a Latin word which means seat or chair. And it refers basically to the chair or the seat of the bishop. And it's a symbol of authority. There's nothing magical about a chair in the church. It's just a symbol of the bishop's authority. So a cathedral is a church that contains the seat of a bishop. You have to have a bishop if you're going to have a cathedral. Okay, technically. Now we love to do this in our culture. We take words and decide they mean whatever we darn well feel like they mean. And so we call all kinds of things cathedrals, which aren't cathedrals. But in the Catholic Church, you have to have a bishop, and that's how you get a cathedral. And it has to be designated by the Pope. So a local bishop can't say, oh, I guess this is a cathedral now. The Pope has to do that for the entire church. So the Pope earns his money too, which in the case of Francis was zero. He didn't take a salary. But he basically donated his salary to, actually in his case, it was to help poor and dispossessed people. So he got no money, but the popes earn their money. They're busy, really busy. But to have a diocese or an archdiocese, you have to have a cathedral. Because you have to have a bishop, right? And so bishops and cathedrals go together with the diocese. And that's the central church there, and they had cathedrals for a very long time. And by 1100 AD, they had cathedrals which were pretty much like the cathedrals we have today. I mean, in other words, the meaning of cathedral was pretty much set in place by 1100. So,
Question.
yes.
Back to your map of Wisconsin, does the name of the diocese speak to where the cathedral is in that diocese?
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah. And we're going to look at the cathedral in Madison in just a minute.
Thank you.
What's that? I just wanted to make a point that the cathedrals then are different than parish churches. You know, they're a very different kind of thing. And I thought we'd look at a couple of examples from Guatemala. This is the National Cathedral of Guatemala. I don't have good pictures from inside, but you can look through the front doors and see kind of the inside of the National Cathedral. This is a cathedral. This is a parish church at Santiago de Atitlan in Guatemala. And this is inside that parish church. So, another example, the National Cathedral of Costa Rica. Inside that, looks like this. This is a parish church, which is a pretty elaborate church. This is a pretty hot church, you know. It's also in Costa Rica. And here's a priest who's administering or during the service at that particular parish church. So parish churches can be big and elaborate, and they can actually be upgraded to the cathedrals if the Pope says so and if there's a bishop there, which is the case of what happened at Madison. And we'll get to that in just a second. This is the cathedral in Milwaukee, St. John the Evangelist. This is the cathedral. This is inside. This is the one in Dubuque. Dubuque is an ecclesiastical province. Nice. Yeah. And Dubuque is the center of that. I mean, Dubuque is the center of Catholicism in northeastern Iowa for sure. Here's St. Raphael's outside and inside. So, it's a pretty impressive building. Have you guys been there? I haven't been either. I stole these pictures, but this is a pretty impressive building, I'll tell you. So Madison had an interesting thing since recently. Their cathedral burned down. That was in 2005. And it was called St. Raphael's Cathedral. So they burned most of the cathedral at that point, and then they just leveled it, you know, because there's nothing left to fix. And so they had to have a cathedral, right? Because there's a bishop there for the Diocese of Madison. And so Donald Hying, who became the bishop there in 2019, petitioned to Pope Francis and said, we need a cathedral. We have this one, St. Bernard, which looks like that inside, which I think is pretty darn impressive. And can we make this a cathedral? And Pope Francis studied it and, you know, had got information about it and said, yes, we can do that. So he did that last year. And the consecration of the new cathedral is going to take place in a few months, sometime this summer. They're actually doing some renovations to make it even cooler. And so they're going to do that. So that's how you get a new cathedral if you don't want to build one, which is going to cost you, you know, $100 million or something to build a cathedral. So dioceses are divided up into parishes. Those are individual churches. So St. Clement is a parish. And I'm sure both Judy and Linda, maybe all of you know the priest there. I don't know who the priest is. What's his name?
Mark. They're all Mark.
Mark.
They're all Mark.
He's the guy that wrote the gospel? That's, yeah. They often work in teams, especially for, and St. Clement's is a reasonably good sized parish. Oh, really? That guy must have been really busy. Yeah. Yeah, and we're going to talk about that in a minute too. So, but usually a parish is administered by a priest, but they don't have to have a priest administering a parish. And this is a acknowledgement that there just aren't enough priests. The Roman Catholic Church is chronically short of priests. They ask an awful lot of their priests, and they certainly don't make a lot of money, and they work really hard, and there's a lot of discipline involved in being a priest, and so it's a hard act to recruit for. And the Roman Catholic Church is constantly short of priests. So if there is no priest available, a parish can be led by a deacon or even a ecclesial minister, which is not even a clergy, just a lay person who wants to take over and can do that. So right now there's almost 2,000 parishes worldwide led by a deacon or an ecclesial minister that don't have a priest. Now there's 221,000 parishes. So the Roman Catholic Church has more parishes than we have total people in our church. That's a lot of parishes. But about 19% of all parishes don't have a resident pastor, and so these poor priests are ministering in multiple congregations. I think you said that they're doing that at Bagley. Where else? Yeah, okay. But this is not uncommon to try to cover, you know, the fact that they're short of priests. So here's an example of that from my experience in Peru. Here's a map showing Chivay, which is the big city, and there's a river flowed down here called the Colca, and the priest is in Chivay. But there are 10 villages along this river. This is mountainous, so that's where all the people are, is along the river. There are 10 villages along this river, and he is responsible for all of those villages. And so in this particular case, a guy died in the town named Interior Bernal, and the priest had to come from Chivay to Coparaki, which is right there. It's only about 5 kilometers, so it's not a huge distance, but he had to walk, you know. And so to do the funeral service. And here's the funeral service, and here's the close-up. You can see the priest is right there. There's his little face right there. And there was something going on here. The priests obviously don't know the people that well because they hardly ever see them. I mean, they're doing 10 congregations, you can imagine. Interior Bernal had just been spurned by the woman he loved deeply, and he killed himself. And in Roman Catholicism, you cannot be buried in consecrated ground if you do that. And there was a conspiracy amongst all of the townspeople to not tell the priest how he died, because they wanted him buried in consecrated ground, because they loved him. He was the postmaster, and everybody loved him, and so forth. So they got away with it. He got buried in consecrated ground. That's an indication of how little the priest knows what's really going on in some cases, because it's hard. And in some cases, here, lay people perform religious rites. This is called the Tinkachi, which is a deeply sacred experience for the native peoples of the highlands of Peru. And this guy here, Epifano Condravilca, here he is over here, performed the ceremony. He was just a farmer. I shouldn't say just a farmer. He was a great farmer, but he was a farmer. He was not a priest. Because no priest could possibly have done this, have done all of these, because every farmer was doing these at about the same time, just before Lent. So usually recruiting and training priests is a local kind of thing. No women allowed, as you probably know. Man just decides he has a call. He wants to be a priest. He wants to go to seminary. He wants to serve God. And so they do. The seminary experience is really rigorous, academically and religiously. You end up with at least the equivalent of a college degree, if not maybe a master's degree. So it's really rigorous. And then after completing the training, he tries to find a church home, which, given the shortage of priests, is usually not too hard. But they usually have local training areas, and they then serve in the local areas. So if you're trained in one of the two Catholic seminaries in Wisconsin, they're both over by Milwaukee, you're likely to end up in Wisconsin as a Catholic priest somewhere. But there's one in Minnesota here at Winona, which is just right on the border. It's almost, you can see Wisconsin from there. And so they provide priests for Wisconsin as well. And priests make $16 an hour, which 40 hours a week, which they don't do 40 hours a week, but if they did, it would be $33,000. So, yes. For what?
Do they get more than just...
Oh, you mean a priest? There's usually a house where they live, and I assume they get that free. Cardinals don't. Cardinals have to pay for their own lodging and their own food, and that was a policy that Francis insisted on, because he wanted the church to be a church of the poor serving the poor. You know, he didn't want people making a lot of bucks or anything like that. So that's a really good question. Why don't you research that and report next time? That'll be your homework, okay? Because I don't know the answer. Yeah. Well, there is offering. I assume that helps contribute to that, but maybe the diocese will chip in if there's not enough. I don't know. I have no idea. Anybody knows? So you get what you pay for here. I'm free, and so you're not getting. Deacons are also trained in theology and spiritual and pastoral formation. Their level of training not as great as a priest, and they almost all have day jobs, because they don't get paid a dime for being a deacon. You don't get paid. And some of them are running congregations without getting paid at all. So they have jobs during the day to make it work. But they can also be married. Deacons can be married. Priests and bishops absolutely cannot be married. Okay, let's talk about the Pope. Of course, the Pope has the greatest authority of anybody in the Roman Catholic Church. He is definitely the big guy. And that authority comes because the Bishop of Rome was founded by St. Peter and St. Paul, according to Catholic teachings. And the authority is derived by the role of the Pope, whoever the Pope is, as the successor to St. Peter, who was the first Pope. And so it's an apostolic authority. So they function as apostles with the same level of authority that the apostles had, the apostles of Jesus had. Okay. And the basis for that is from Matthew 16:18-19. Peter received his calling directly from Jesus, who conferred the keys of heaven on Peter, naming him the rock on which the church would be built. And it says, I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And his name was Simon before this, and he took the name Peter because Peter comes from the Greek word for rock. Although actually his name is Petros, not Petra. Petros, which refers to a small rock, but it's still rock. And I can tell you, since I went through all this curriculum, that geology, in the science of geology today, the study of rocks is petrology, which comes from the Greek. It means the study of rocks. Literally, that's what it means, the study of rocks. Yes.
Was Peter actually the bishop of Rome? Like, did he make it to Rome?
Yeah, he was, well, according to Catholic teachings and beliefs, he was the Bishop of Rome, yes.
Okay. Is that in Scripture?
Not that I can remember.
I don't remember that either. Okay. Okay.
So the Pope is the Bishop of Rome, but his authority goes way beyond of that. His jurisdiction, essentially his diocese, is the whole world. And it's called the Holy See. And the see is derived from a Greek word meaning chair again. So it's a symbolic thing of authority that he has the chair of the whole earth, basically. And that's what that means. So the Holy See is the central governing body of the entire Roman Catholic Church. The Pope is also the political head of Vatican City, which is a country. You know, geographers call them states. And they're not states like Alabama or something like that. These are countries. And the Vatican has the authority of a country. And so they have all the governmental positions that you normally would have and so forth. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And before we leave, I thought I'd throw in papal infallibility because this is a doctrine which a lot of people think they know exactly what it means, and they're almost always wrong. Most people don't have a clue what papal infallibility actually refers to. A lot of people think that the Pope, as soon as they become Pope, everything he says and does is perfect. The Catholics believe that. That's not at all what they believe, and nobody believes that. To invoke infallibility, the Pope has to declare that he's doing it. He has to speak ex cathedra, which means from the seat of St. Peter. So he has to declare that he's doing it. And when he's speaking ex cathedra, they believe that the Pope is incapable of making an error. But this is extremely rare. It has never been done in my lifetime. And I'm an old geezer. In fact, it's only been done one time since 1870. And that's when the policy of papal infallibility was put in place, was in 1870. So it's only been done once that a Pope has spoken with infallibility. And they announced that he was doing it, and it was in 1950 when when Pope Pius ruled ex cathedra on the bodily assumption of Mary. What he said basically was, Mary was taken to heaven in bodily form, and there's no debate about that. If you don't like that, leave the church. That's basically what he said. But that's the only time it's ever been used. So most people don't really have a good feeling for what papal infallibility means. It would take an amazingly strong pope to invoke it, to be honest with you, because people are going to scream bloody murder about it if they did. So the Pope is easily the most influential Christian in the world by a long margin. Nobody else is even remotely close to the Pope's authority and influence. And he's also, of course, influential in political and cultural affairs. And what that means is that choosing a Pope is an extremely important thing. And it's important not just from a religious point of view, or for Catholics. It's important for Christians everywhere. It's important for non-Christians. It's important for heads of state. Everybody. I mean, you can see that. Francis's funeral was yesterday, and there were 50 heads of state who went. You know? We never had a president of our church had a head of state come, 50 heads of state. That's more than a lot of heads of state get for their funerals. So this is a really, really big deal. And it has huge influence politically, religiously, and in all kinds of ways. So here's an example of Pope Francis meeting Barack Obama, the Japanese Emperor Naruhito, President of France Emmanuel Macron, President Guillermo Lasso of Ecuador, and you could find he met maybe 100 heads of state and conferred with them as equals, talking about world affairs and all this kind of stuff. I mean, he was a head of state also. He was the head of state of the Vatican. He was treated that way. And Francis, as you might guess, I didn't know him, but from what I've read about him, he was a jovial, kind man. But when he wanted to get in your face, he did, even with heads of state. And there were a number of heads of state he met where he basically just lectured them on what they're doing wrong. He had that kind of moral authority that he could do that. And three which are sometimes noted as when he met with Donald Trump. He kind of lectured Donald Trump with Vladimir Putin, and this guy got taken to the woodshed. I mean, Joseph Kabila, I don't know if you know much about DR Congo. I'm not going to get into this right now, but he's done a lot of things he shouldn't have done. And the Pope just tore him apart. What are you doing? And the Pope has the authority to excommunicate a Roman Catholic, which sends them straight to hell if they don't behave. So he has that kind of moral authority too. So Francis, as you know, died last Monday, the day after Easter. It was a bit of a shock, even though he had been in poor health, because he celebrated Easter Mass and gave the Easter blessing and looked okay, but he had a stroke on Monday morning and died. And he was the 266th Pope. Funeral took place yesterday. He had planned his own funeral, not recently. I mean, it was a year ago when his health was starting to fail. He planned his own funeral. He wanted it done a certain way. And it emphasized his consuming passion for the poor, the marginalized, and the dispossessed. These were the themes which animated his papacy. He talked about this all the time. That's why he took the name Francis, after Francis of Assisi, who was the patron saint of the poor, the dispossessed, and so forth. Look at these numbers. 250,000 people were in St. Peter's Basilica for the funeral at the plaza. Another 150,000 lined the procession, the route. That's 400,000 people showed up for his funeral. And Francis had requested the procession go along a route that would take it past homeless people, immigrants, and prisoners. He wanted them included, because this was his ministry, was to the poorest of the poor and the dispossessed. That did not sit well with a lot of people. But Francis's reading of the Gospels is that this is what Jesus did. So we're going to do it too. It's kind of that simple. Now here's something which was amazing. The United States government ordered the flags flown at half-mast, half-staff, excuse me. Half-mast is only for naval people. Half-staff for Francis. which I don't think has ever been done before. If it has, I don't know about it. And in fact, technically, flying the flag at half-staff from a government edict is usually only reserved for U.S. citizens. But it's a testimony to his authority and his prestige and his influence in the world that our government ordered this to happen. Now, the way it works for half-staff is all federal institutions have to lower the flag to half-staff. They have to. But states don't necessarily have to do that. You know, a state can decide not to do it if they don't want to on state buildings, on state things. People with their own flag in their home don't have to do it. Nobody's going to come arrest them or anything like that if they don't. If a state does follow the federal guidelines, the state flag always has to be lower than the national flag, so the state flag is also going to be lowered to half-staff as well. And so you can see this is a picture I took yesterday. Teresa and I just drove back from Arkansas yesterday. So we drove through Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, and then to Wisconsin. And in Iowa, I mean, I was clocking how many flags at half-staff I saw. Arkansas, everybody was doing it. Missouri, almost nobody did it. I saw one in the entire state of Missouri, and we drove the entire length of the state of Missouri. Iowa was doing it, and here's the Iowa state flag underneath the American flag. So this is just yesterday. So how popes are chosen? We're going to wrap up with this. Okay, this is kind of complicated, but we're going to go through this. Now we can talk about cardinals, and not the baseball team. Or the bird, or Stanford. University of Stanford, I was going to say. But there is a connection between Stanford and the College Cardinals. You know what it is? The color. Cardinal refers to a color, and Stanford's mascot is a color, not an animal. It's not the bird. It's a color. And College of Cardinals had that same color on their clothes. You'll see that in a minute. But the cardinal is a high-ranking and very powerful person in the Catholic Church, almost always a bishop who is appointed to be a cardinal by the Pope. And the Pope does that. The Pope appoints cardinals. They approximate the same level as an apostle in our church. You know, the same kind of thing, you know, in terms of authority and so forth. There are 252 cardinals. Only 138 of them are called cardinal electors. They're eligible to vote for a new pope. So not all cardinals can vote, just 138 can. It looks now that 134 of those are going to participate in the upcoming conclave. Some are sick, some can't get there, you know, because you have to be in Rome to do it. You can't do it by Zoom or anything like that. So church law forbids anybody over 80 voting for a pope. So you have to be under 80 to do this. There are some cardinals over 80. They don't get to participate. So not all cardinals are electors. But the cardinals elect the pope. That's nobody else is involved. It's just the cardinals. So when a pope dies or resigns, a papal conclave is formed. Conclave is what they call the get together where they decide who's going to be the new pope, and the voting takes place. I haven't yet seen the recent movie called Conclave. I hear it's really excellent, and it might it's probably getting a lot of streams right now.
Yeah. It's up like 5,000%.
Yeah, I was going to say, I bet it's getting a lot of streams right now, and it'll give you at least an idea of how this process goes. It's a little complicated. But anyway, technically, any Roman Catholic man can be elected pope. Any of them. You don't have to even be a priest. You don't have to be anybody. You can just be a guy. You know? So pick a guy you know who's Roman Catholic, he can become the pope. But of course, in reality, they always choose a cardinal. And it's been that way since 1378. That was the last time a non-cardinal was made pope. And that was in a really interesting time. Well, we won't go into that right there. So after the funeral of a pope, there are 9 days of official mourning before the conclave can even think about beginning, which means May 5th is the earliest date the conclave can meet, and it probably will be a little later than that because it takes a while to organize them. So right now there's nobody running the Catholic Church. Is that what's going on? Well, no, because they realize this is a problem. So there's a cardinal who's previously been appointed to the Camerlengo, which is Italian and term which we would call a chamberlain. And that pope, that cardinal, is in charge of the Holy See until a new pope is appointed. And that person right now is Kevin Farrell, an American cardinal who, before he went to the Vatican, had been the Bishop of Dallas. So here's the papal conclave. It always takes place in the Sistine Chapel, which is one of the most spectacular places on earth. I can see why they would choose that. It just makes you, I think, even atheists go in there and suddenly feel the spirit. I don't know. It's just an amazing place. But this is the cardinal color right there, and they all wear it. So popes usually serve until they die. The one exception was Benedict XVI, the Pope just before Francis, who in 2013 resigned because he said his health was poor, although he lived 9 more years. But he did resign, and he was the first one to resign since 1415. So for a really long time, all popes were Italians. They had to be Italian, basically, to be a pope. But in recent years, they've said, okay, let's not be that way. Let's open it up a little bit, and we're going to start looking at cardinals from other parts of the world. So John Paul II was named Pope in 1978. He was the first non-Italian Pope since 1523. He was from Poland. And he was followed by Benedict, who was German, and Francis, who was Argentine. His name is Jorge Mario Bergoglio. That's Francis's real name. That's what his family calls him. Oh, I did? Wow. Anyway, so we haven't had an Italian pope now since 1978. Yes, Judy? We are going to get to that. I only know of one, but yeah, there is a cardinal from Wisconsin that is in the running, but we're going to get to that in a minute. Okay. Point out that choosing a pope can be quite contentious, which I understand is one of the themes of the movie Conclave, is the contentions it goes through. It doesn't go down to the level of an American political election, you know, with all the crazy stuff that goes on and something like that. But it's contentious, and there's politicking that goes on. And if I like Cardinal Joe over here and you like Cardinal Bill over here, I'll try to get all my friends to vote for Cardinal Joe, and you'll try to get your friends to vote for Cardinal Bill and things like that. I mean, that's just how it goes. It's pretty contentious. And the reason why is because it's so important. Did I want to go back?
When you squeeze your hand, you go back.
Just gotta settle down, take it easy. We don't need to go through all this, but the most contentious time was in the 1300s when they actually elected 3 popes all at the same time. There were 3 different splinter groups, and they couldn't agree, and they said, I want this pope, I want this pope, I want this pope, and they fought it out. And they finally, after a while, after it tore the church apart, they finally said, okay, let's fix this and go back to 1 pope. But there's always a lot of candidates for consideration who are considered to be the ones who have a chance, you know. I understand that the guy Hying, the cardinal at, no, he's not a cardinal, he's a bishop. But anyway, I understand that there are lots of really good cardinals, but most of them don't get considered. There's a handful that do. And cardinals will line up based on what they think the church should look like. You know, because that guy's vision is in line with my vision for the church, so I'm going to support that guy, you know. And they, like I said, politicking and goes on, and they take ballots and so forth and so on. Because all cardinals don't think alike. In fact, they often don't think remotely alike. So Benedict XVI here was a very conservative pope, one of the most conservative popes almost certainly in my lifetime. And when Francis followed him after he resigned, Francis was open to change. And that's one of the reasons why he became pope, because people were thinking we need to start progressing a little bit in certain directions. And we'll talk a little bit more about how he became pope. But he was not considered at all a likely candidate when the whole conclave started. He came out of sort of nowhere. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So there's this kind of basic split that you see in a lot of times between conservative and progressive, you know, and there's also moderates, and there's all kinds of a whole spectrum of people who want to be pope. So it's going to be difficult. It's going to be a challenge because there's a very strong conservative bloc, and they want to get one of their guys in there. And of course, the progressives want to get their guys in there. And a lot of people are saying we should get a moderate in there, you know, a conciliator, you know, whatever. And much has been made out of the fact that Francis has appointed a majority of the cardinals who will choose the new pope. And people are going to say, oh, they're his boys and they're going to just vote the way he wanted them to, and the legacy is going to be a progressive and all that kind of stuff. And that certainly is not likely to happen. For several reasons. One is many European and almost all American bishops or cardinals are really conservative. The American Catholic Church is the most conservative Catholic Church in the world. And so there's a lot of cardinals there who are not going to have another progressive type of pope. They opposed him on these kinds of bases. Francis made an outreach to gay Catholics, for example. Remember, his ministry was to dispossessed people who had been shunned, people who had been treated badly. So he said, okay, I'm going to reach out to these people, you know. He relaxed the rules on priestly celibacy. He allowed divorced and remarried believers to receive communion, which really irritated a lot of Catholic cardinals, conservatives. And he almost nearly outlawed masses in Latin. They need to be in the vernacular language, German or French or English or whatever language is there. But the African cardinals, see, a lot of the African cardinals were appointed by Francis. You know, many of the African cardinals are really upset with Francis because of his outreach to gay Catholics. Because, well, just because. That's the way Africa is. So there's a strong bloc that is looking for a real conservative pope. There's other people who want a progressive. There's other people who want a moderate. So it's going to be a Donnybrook. It's going to be it's not going to be the first ballot, I don't think. So here's the primary candidates. There's three who have kind of risen to the top so far that people are talking about more than others. This guy, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, and forgive my poor pronunciation of these names. That's this guy. He's probably the strongest candidate. He's the Secretary of State of the Vatican. Remember, the Vatican is a country. He's the Secretary of State, like Marco Rubio is the Secretary of State for the United States. He's the Secretary of State for the Vatican. The highest ranking member of the conclave. He's 70 years old. He's considered a theological and political moderate. And he's an Italian. So, see, what has he got going for him? Well, one, there's a lot of people saying it's time to have a moderate. A lot of people are saying, a lot of the conservatives are saying we want to go back to the Italians. So he might pick up some conservative votes. He knows everybody, and everybody knows him, and he knows the Holy See backwards and forwards. So he's ready for the job. There's going to be no training on his part. He's just going to move right in and start. This guy is also considered one of the top contenders, and is thinking the thought is he's going to really be, he might actually pull it off. He might get it. You know, Peter Erdo, 72 years old, he's Hungarian. He's the leading candidate of the conservatives. This is the conservative candidate for the most part. And then Luis Antonio Tagle is Filipino. He'd be the first Asian pope ever. He would continue the legacy of Francis as a progressive. He's 67. So basically, these top three guys, you've got a moderate, a conservative, and a progressive. And so people are lining up behind those blocks. But this is not all of it. There's more, lots more. We don't probably need to go through all of these, but these 6 are other candidates which people are talking about, and some of those their stock is rising, you know, they're getting more noted and so forth. So we have people who are a favorite of Francis. This guy is also highly regarded by Francis. This guy is a moderate. This guy is not liked by some because he worked real hard to mediate the priest sex scandal stuff. And he was trying to bring some resolution to that and so forth. A lot of people said we should just leave that alone. And so he got things, and we got 2 from the United States. This is the one that I ran to. His name came up, Raymond Leo Burke, an American from Wisconsin, who is also one of the candidates. Now, he's considered one of the second-tier candidates, but you never know what's going to happen. Could easily be. He's a conservative. He did not get along with Francis at all, but most American cardinals didn't. And so he's a possibility, too. This guy also, Robert Prevost, is from the United States, and his name is getting thrown around a lot, too. He's a possibility. We never had an American pope, and so who knows? And then there are the Africans. There are 3 Africans who are considered strong and getting stronger candidates. 2 of these, especially, their stock is rising. And this is how it goes. It kind of like somebody's talking about him a lot, and maybe somebody else is not getting talked about, so they're going down, but this guy's going up, and that's how it works, you know. And so Peter Turkson from Ghana, if made pope, that's not even a sentence. So forget that. But there hasn't been an African pope since the 400s, and that African pope was from Tunisia. So I think it was Tunisia, Algeria, someplace like that. Robert Serra from Guinea. He's good. All of these are theologically conservative. You know, most of the African cardinals, cardinals are theologically conservative. And this guy, whose name I'm going to butcher badly, Fridolin Ambongo Besungu, is 65. He's the youngest candidate, is 65. He's from DR Congo. And his stock has been rising recently, too. So could have an African pope, you know. So these, you know, likely one of these names that we've thrown up here is going to be the next pope, but there's no guarantee of that. It's entirely possible that none of these will be chosen. You know, the only leading candidate to actually become pope was Benedict XVI in the last 4 or 5 popes. Other than that, it was somebody that nobody expected to became pope. So that's kind of a tradition, you know. And Francis, who was way down the list when the conclave started, and the testimony of the cardinals in the conclave was that there was some sort of a powerful spiritual experience that just enveloped the Sistine Chapel. And everybody after that experience said, Francis. Now, it's quite likely that that experience has been described and is out there for people to know what it is. I haven't ever seen what happened, though. I don't know what happened. But it was a powerful experience. People who couldn't stand the thought of Francis suddenly were voting for him. I mean, so who knows what's going to happen? So that could happen again. You know, we hope that happens again. We'd like to have that be the basis of this. Okay, the process of election, we can run through this pretty quickly. There's a lot of this kind of information is out there right now because everybody's talking about the process. But the cardinals hear 2 sermons before voting, one before the conclave, and then one once they're in the Sistine Chapel during the conclave. The sermons are designed to lay out the struggles of the church, what's out there, what's the issues, and to seek God's blessing. You know, what's that? People in the Vatican, and I think there's people who are chosen. They're usually people who are chosen who are not candidates. They're cardinals. I'm sorry. They're almost always cardinals, and they're people who are not candidates, but who are well respected. So the day of the first day of voting, the cardinals assemble in St. Peter's Basilica, celebrate Mass, and process as a group to the Sistine Chapel while singing hymns. That's what they're doing here. Great place to work, don't you think? Wow. They take an oath, and among other things in the oath, they promise to observe the proper procedures for the vote, to maintain secrecy, and they're really big on secrecy. To disregard any attempt by secular authorities to influence the vote. And then at the end of all that, here's the oath. It's in Latin, actually, not in English. I, give a name, cardinal surname, so promise, pledge, and swear, so help me God, and these holy gospels which I now touch with my hands. So it's a pretty binding kind of oath. And they promise to do it right and to not reveal what's going on. Secrecy is important. To some degree, even afterwards. Yeah. So after they've taken the oath, all non-conclave people are urged to leave, so it's just the cardinals who are voting. The votes are done in absolute secrecy. No cardinal can correspond or communicate with anybody outside the conclave. Of course, they don't allow them to have any kind of electronic devices at all. In 2013, when Francis became Pope, the chapel was electronically swept for listening devices. They didn't find any. Journalists sometimes try to hide in the Sistine Chapel so they can get a scoop, because this is hot news, man. I mean, everybody in the world wants to know what's going to happen. So the journalist that gets that scoop has got his career made. Wi-Fi is blocked. Wireless signal jammers are used in the Sistine Chapel. I mean, they don't want this. They want it to be secret. The vote itself is done on paper ballots. You just write the name of the pope you like, or the candidate you like. And if the candidate doesn't gain a 2/3 majority, it's not just a majority, it's a 2/3 majority, then vote after vote after vote is taken until somebody gets 2/3. And so after each ballot, the paper ballots are burned to destroy them. And they put a little chemical in there so that if no pope is chosen, the smoke will be black. Because there are thousands of people who are camped in St. Peter's Basilica and will be there until the pope is chosen. They want to be there for the moment. If they have chosen a pope, then they put a chemical in the paper and white smoke comes out. And then everybody cheers because they know they have a pope. And of course they want to know, who is it? You know. So here's the smoke when Francis was elected. This is Francis's smoke. So once the Pope has been elected, the Cardinal Dean, that's an office, you know, summons the Secretary of the College of Cardinals, the Master of Papal Liturgical Celebrations. That's what? Oh, no, go ahead.
No, my question is, and I was trying to figure this out while I was watching the movie too. How often do they vote? Do you know? Like, is it once a day?
Know. I don't know. I know they can go on and on and on, days and days and days.
Yeah,
I just was it's contentious.
Not clear because
I
they
don't know
it's not like nobody's campaigning because they're not in front of the group. They just come together to vote and then they.
But there's campaigning going on in
behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes in the conclave. So I don't know if they vote at 9 o'clock in the morning and no Pope is chosen, so they vote again at 11 o'clock in the morning. I don't know if they do that or if they wait for a new day. I really don't know. don't know. So once these two big guys come, they ask the Pope-elect if he agrees to be Pope. He has to agree to do this. It's really unlikely anybody would say no, because they know they're up for election, and they would have called a halt to the process if they hadn't. But in 1978, that did happen. There's somebody who was being talked about, and after a vote, and he realized he was getting votes, he said, "No, I don't want it. Don't vote for me." You know, so if the Pope-elect accepts, and he's already a bishop, and almost everybody already is a bishop, I can't remember the last, I mean, it's like 600 years or something since he has been a bishop, then he immediately takes office, right then. If for some reason they elect somebody who's not a bishop, they first have to be consecrated as a bishop. Because remember, his title is Bishop of Rome. So if a local Catholic guy walking down the street becomes Pope and is, you know, just works at, you know, A&W or something like that, then they're going to make a bishop out of him before he becomes Pope. That's not going to happen, of course, but you know. And that's it, and we're done. And so orthodoxy will have to wait. Now I can ask you again, do you want to go on with orthodoxy next time? Are you getting tired of this kind of stuff? Because we got lots to talk about with orthodoxy too. But what? Think about it. I don't know when the next time is we're doing Education Sunday, but it's next month sometime, I assume. So, yes. No. That's why the oath of secrecy is so important. Because, of course, journalists and everybody is trying to grab a cardinal and saying, what's going on? What's going on? And if they are at all disciplined, and they all are, they say, can't tell you. You don't know. Because it can be, I think, weeks sometimes before this is done. So that's it. And we can talk about orthodoxy some other time if you want. It's complicated.